Right, so get this. We're diving into what humans might actually look like after thousands of years on Mars.
Oh, wow.
Not just like a quick visit,
Right.
like generations evolving
Yeah.
to make the red planet their home.
Generations born on Mars.
Yeah, so buckle up because this research paper we've got
Mm-hmm.
digs into some wild possibilities.
It really does. It challenges you to think long term, you know?
Yeah.
We're so used to considering Mars as like a destination.
Uh-huh.
But what about Mars as a birthplace?
Right.
Shaping humanity in ways we can barely imagine.
Exactly. So first things first, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the lack of gravity on Mars.
Right.
It's only 38% of what we're used to here on Earth.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
What does that do to a body over, say, a few thousand years?
Well, think about those super-toned astronauts coming back from the International Space Station.
Right.
They've got weaker bones and muscles just from a few months up there.
Yeah, that's right.
Now stretch that out over generations on Mars.
Okay, so we're talking lighter, thinner bones, almost brittle.
Potentially, yes.
Oh.
And muscle mass would decrease too, since they wouldn't be constantly fighting Earth's gravity.
Right.
The paper suggests this could even lead to changes in height.
Really?
Future Martians might actually be taller and more slender than us.
Whoa. Now I'm picturing these long-limbed Martians, almost delicate looking.
That's an interesting image.
But wouldn't that make them kind of fragile too? Like one strong gust of Martian wind and whoosh, they're gone.
That's where things get interesting. The paper doesn't just stop at the physical changes.
Oh, yeah.
It dives into how those changes might impact their lifestyle and even their culture.
Oh, interesting.
For example, a society that has to be mindful of physical fragility might develop incredibly sophisticated support systems and technologies.
Ooh, that's smart. Like maybe their buildings are designed to protect them from the elements.
Exactly.
And their transportation is super smooth and gentle. No more bumpy Martian rovers for these folks.
Precisely, their entire way of life might revolve around mitigating the effects of their adapted physiology.
All right, so we've got these potentially tall, slender Martians living in a high-tech, low-impact society.
It's a fascinating scenario.
But what about breathing? Everyone knows the Martian atmosphere is super thin and mostly carbon dioxide. No good for us Earthlings.
Right, you're not going to see Martians walking around with gills anytime soon.
No, I was kind of hoping for that.
That's pure sci-fi. However, the paper does suggest that their lungs could adapt to become more efficient at extracting oxygen.
Interesting.
Imagine super lungs able to make the most of even the tiniest bit of available oxygen.
Okay, so no swimming through Martian canals, but maybe they're like those freedivers who can hold their breath for crazy amounts of time.
It's not quite the same thing, but you're getting at the idea of their bodies optimizing for a limited resource.
Right.
And of course, they'd still need some kind of artificial environment to produce breathable air.
Speaking of adapting to harsh environments,
Yeah.
let's talk about that Martian tan. Everyone pictures future Martians with reddish skin. Is that just a sunburn, or is there something more to it?
It's actually a very real possibility. Mars lacks a strong magnetic field and a thick atmosphere like Earth's, so a lot more radiation reaches the surface.
Right.
The paper suggests human skin could adapt to this intense radiation.
More melanin, darker skin tones, I get that. But what about those DNA repair mechanisms you mentioned earlier?
Right.
How did those work?
Essentially, our cells already have ways to fix damage to our DNA, like from the sun's UV rays.
Okay.
But on Mars, these mechanisms would need to be supercharged to handle the higher radiation levels.
So a Martian can wouldn't just be about looking cool, it'd be a sign of serious cellular protection, right?
Exactly. It'd be a vital adaptation for survival in that environment.
Oh.
And who knows, maybe it would lead to entirely new skin pigments colors we haven't even seen on Earth.
Okay, picture this tall, slender, deep tan Martians. This is getting good. But Mars doesn't get a lot of sunlight, does it?
No, not nearly as much as Earth.
What happens to their eyes?
That's where things get even more interesting. The paper suggests that with less sunlight, future Martians might evolve to have larger eyes, or maybe their retinas become incredibly sensitive to make the most of the dim light.
Like superpowered night vision. That's pretty awesome.
Think about all the subtle shades of light and shadow they'd be able to perceive. It'd be a completely different way of seeing the world.
All right, I'm totally on board with this Martian makeover. But one last question before we move on. Will our future Martians be skinny or stocky? How would their metabolism handle a whole new planet?
That's where we really get into the unknowns. The paper proposes two main possibilities. One is that to conserve energy in a colder resource, scarce environment, Martians might become smaller overall, not tiny, but definitely more compact.
So instead of towering giants, we might get super efficient mini-Martians.
Exactly. Their bodies might be perfectly tuned to minimizing energy expenditure, which would be crucial in a challenging Martian environment.
I can almost see it now, these small but mighty Martians carefully cultivating their limited resources, making every calorie count. Talk about a sustainable lifestyle. But what's the other possibility?
Well, the paper also suggests they might evolve completely different metabolic pathways, ways of processing energy that we haven't even encountered here on Earth.
Whoa, now we're talking alien biology. Like,
Yeah.
what if they can get energy directly from sunlight like plants, or maybe they can survive on just a few sips of Martian water a day?
It's getting a bit into science fiction territory, but the point is their metabolic processes could be incredibly unique, adapted to utilize whatever resources are available on Mars.
Okay, I'm loving this Martian TAMs, super efficient metabolisms, and maybe even some crazy new ways of processing energy. But there's one thing we haven't touched on yet, their immune systems. What happens to human immunity on a completely sterile planet?
That's a question that really highlights the long-term thinking required for Martian settlement. Living in enclosed habitats, potentially for generations, could lead to significant changes in the human immune system.
So would they be super vulnerable to Earth germs if they ever came back? Like one little cold could wipe them out?
It's certainly a possibility that their immune systems might become hyper-specialized to the specific microbes present in their Martian habitats, leaving them less equipped to handle Earth-based pathogens.
On the flip side, could they develop defenses against Martian microbes, things we haven't even encountered yet?
Ah,
What if those turn out to be super dangerous to us Earthlings?
that's another unknown, and it highlights the importance of careful quarantine and biosecurity measures when traveling between Earth and Mars. We wouldn't want to trigger an interplanetary pandemic.
Okay, duly noted. Pack plenty of hand sanitizer on your next trip to Mars. But seriously, it's amazing to think that simply living on Mars could lead to such profound changes in the human species. But how long would this all take? Are we talking a few generations or something much longer?
That's where we need to think in evolutionary timescales. We're talking tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years for these adaptations to really take hold.
Wow, hundreds of thousands of years. That's mind-boggling. It really puts human history into perspective, doesn't it?
It does imagine the pyramids are only about 4,500 years old. The timescales we're talking about for Martian evolution dwarf even the most ancient human structures.
So if we send a group of humans to Mars today, their great, and many more greats-grandchildren would be the ones sporting those Martian tans and super lungs.
Precisely, it's a long game, and it requires a whole new way of thinking about human settlement. It's not just about planting a flag, it's about seeding a future for humanity that extends far beyond our own lifespans.
Okay, I'm officially blown away. But here's a question. Could this process be sped up somehow? I mean, waiting hundreds of thousands of years for humans to adapt seems like a long time.
That's where things get really interesting. The paper touches on the potential for human intervention in this evolutionary process, specifically through technologies like genetic engineering.
Oh, now we're getting into some serious sci-fi territory.
Mhm.
Are you saying we could create designer Martians, like picking and choosing the traits we want?
It's not quite that simple, but the paper does suggest that targeted genetic modifications could potentially accelerate the adaptation process, for example, enhancing genes related to radiation resistance or bone density.
So instead of waiting for natural selection to do its thing, we could give evolution a little nudge in the right direction, like fast-forwarding the process.
It's a possibility, but of course there are a lot of ethical and philosophical questions to consider. Are we playing God if we start tinkering with the human genome to adapt to a new planet? What unforeseen consequences might arise?
Heavy stuff. It seems like we're opening a Pandora's box of possibilities here. But for now, let's stick to the science. We've talked a lot about the physical changes humans might undergo on Mars, but what about their minds? Will Martian brains evolve differently?
That's a question that really sparks the imagination. While the paper doesn't delve into specific cognitive changes, it's certainly a fascinating area to consider.
So no telepathic Martians communicating across the Martian plains. Bummer.
Maybe not telepathy, but think about the mental challenges of living on Mars, navigating a completely new environment, solving problems with limited resources, constantly adapting to unexpected situations.
It sounds like they need to be super resourceful and quick on their feet.
Exactly. Those kinds of challenges could favor certain cognitive skills like problem solving, spatial reasoning, and adaptability. Perhaps Martian brains would evolve to become incredibly efficient at processing information and finding creative solutions.
So instead of brawn, they'd rely on brains. I
Why?
like it. Resourceful, adaptable, quick-thinking Martians. It's a pretty cool image.
Hmm.
But what about their social structures? Would Martian societies look anything like ours?
That's a question that takes us beyond the realm of biology and into the realm of sociology and anthropology. The paper doesn't specifically address social structures, but we can speculate based on the unique challenges of living on Mars.
All right, let's speculate what kind of societies might emerge on the red planet.
Imagine smaller, isolated communities perhaps living in self-sufficient habitats. They'd need strong social bonds and a deep sense of cooperation to survive in such a harsh environment.
I can picture it now, tight-knit Martian communities working together, sharing resources and supporting each other, kind of like a giant planetary family.
It's an interesting thought, and who knows, maybe those close-knit communities would develop unique customs traditions, even new forms of government.
Ooh, Martian democracy, or maybe a council of elders making decisions based on what's best for the community. This is getting exciting.
Indeed, and as those communities interact and exchange ideas, perhaps we'd see the emergence of a distinct Martian culture, something completely different from anything we know here on Earth.
A whole new Martian civilization. This is blowing my mind.
It really makes you realize that sending humans to Mars isn't just about exploration or scientific discovery, it's about potentially creating a whole new branch of human civilization, one that could evolve in ways we can barely imagine.
We've covered so much ground already. Martian tans, super efficient metabolisms, genetic engineering, and now even the possibility of entirely new Martian societies and cultures.
Yeah.
But there's one question I still have. We've talked about all the ways humans might change to adapt to Mars, but what about the reverse? Could Martians ever return to Earth? That is the question, isn't it?
Oh,
We've been talking about humans becoming Martians,
right.
but could they ever come back to the nest, so to speak? Would they even be able to?
That's where it gets really tricky. Think about it, if future Martians are adapted to lower gravity, weaker sunlight,
Yeah.
and a completely different atmosphere coming back to Earth could be a major shock to their systems.
Yeah, their bones and muscles might not be strong enough to handle Earth's gravity.
Exactly.
They'd feel super heavy,
Yeah.
like they were carrying around an extra backpack all the time.
Their cardiovascular systems would be working overtime too,
Oh, wow.
trying to pump blood against the stronger gravity.
Right.
And their lungs adapted to a thinner atmosphere might not be able to extract enough oxygen from Earth's air.
So we're talking potential health risks, maybe even needing special suits or habitats just to survive on Earth.
It's a possibility.
It's kind of sad, like they're almost alien on their own home planet.
It is a bit ironic, isn't it? But it also raises a fascinating question. What does it actually mean to be human?
Right.
If our descendants evolve to a point where they can't even survive on the planet where humanity originated, does that change their humanness?
Whoa, deep thoughts. It's like, are they still part of the human story if they're writing their own chapter on a completely different planet?
It's a question philosophers will be debating for centuries, I'm sure. But for now,
Okay.
let's get back to those potential Martian adaptations.
Good.
We've talked about physical changes, but what about their senses? Could living on Mars lead to entirely new senses, ones we can't even comprehend?
Ooh, now we're getting to the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what if they can sense magnetic fields, or see temperature changes, or maybe even communicate through some kind of Martian sonar?
Those are great examples. Our senses evolved based on what was necessary to survive on Earth. On Mars, with its unique environment, who knows what kind of sensory information could become important?
So maybe they develop an incredibly acute sense of touch to navigate the dusty Martian landscape?
Possibly.
Or maybe they can detect minute variations in air pressure, like a sixth sense for Martian weather patterns.
It's mind-blowing to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
They might experience Mars in ways we can't even imagine, perceiving details that are completely invisible to us.
Okay, I'm officially hooked on this idea of super senses.
Yeah.
But let's go back to physical adaptations for a second.
All right.
We've been picturing these tall, slender Martians.
Right.
But what if they actually evolved to be giants?
Ah, the giant Martian theory.
Right.
It's a classic sci-fi trope, but there might be some scientific basis to it. Remember how we talked about Mars's lower gravity?
Yeah.
Well, some scientists believe that over time, the lack of gravitational pressure could actually allow organisms to grow larger than they would on Earth.
So instead of those graceful, slender Martians we imagined earlier, we might end up with a race of towering muscular titans roaming the Martian plains. Talk about a plot twist.
It's certainly a possibility, and it highlights how diverse the outcomes of Martian evolution could be. We might be completely wrong in our assumptions, and what emerges could be something truly unexpected.
All right, one last thought before we wrap things up.
Oh.
What if, after conquering Mars, humans decide to push even further? Can they eventually evolve to survive on worlds even more extreme than the Red Planet? I'm talking Venus Or maybe even a gas giant moon like Titan?
Now you're really stretching the limits of imagination.
I know, I know.
But that's the beauty of evolution. It's a process of constant adaptation. If humans can successfully adapt to Mars, who's to say where our evolutionary journey might end?
Maybe we're just at the beginning of a grand cosmic adventure spreading out across the solar system, becoming a truly multiplanetary species.
It's a thought that fills me with a sense of wonder and excitement. And it all starts with that first step, that leap of faith to a new world.
Well said. It's been an incredible journey exploring the potential evolution of humans on Mars. We've covered everything from Martian tans and super senses to giant Martians and the ethics of genetic engineering.
We've really only scratched the surface of what's possible, but hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and got you thinking about the incredible future that might await humanity beyond Earth.
If you had to design the ideal Martian, what traits would you choose? What challenges haven't we even considered? Keep those what-ifs coming. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get to see those Martian adaptations firsthand.
Until then, keep looking up, stay curious, and never stop exploring the wonders of the universe.
That's a wrap on our Martian deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, keep exploring.